Let the word go
The
forth.
challenge, the opportunity to connect. The 1960s, a time of imagination and change, a time of anger and fear. The 1960s, a pioneering program called CHAL199
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
that looked at our connections, our divisions, through the lens of shared values.
With something real.
60 years later, we examine our divisions, our connections, our shared pains and successes in a new program called Challenge 2.0. In last week's edition of Challenge 2.0, two Seattle area faith leaders examined the controversial claim that God approves of the U.S. attack on Iran. This week, we continue that conversation, examining whether war and violence can be divinely inspired and what faith requires of each of us. So we're continuing our conversation from last week's episode of Challenge 2.0 with Reverend Dr. Michael Reed Trice, a professor at Seattle University and the founding director, and the current director too, for the Center for Ecumenical and Interreligious Engagement.
That's right.
And then a return guest that we've seen many times before, Reverend Terry Kylo, who is the executive director of Paths to Understanding and is the source of this program. So Terry, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jeff.
We were talking a lot, and there were many diverse topics that we had to bring in to properly set this in focus. We were talking about the pushback from faith leaders, and particularly Pope Leo. I think he's been the one that's been most the subject of coverage in the various news media. President Trump did not take well to the Pope's response, which was based on the behavior and the action, not on the president himself. But in a series of posts, and I'm going to read these, the president said, "I don't want a pope who criticizes the president of the United States." Then claimed credit for Leo's election as pope. "If I wasn't in the White House, Leo wouldn't be in the Vatican." Yeah. Do you consider that inappropriate? What was your response, Michael?
Well, I think it's a 1-2 punch. You know, I don't like it, and he's there because I put him there.
Yeah. So
it's an authoritarian grift. You know, it's kind of it's what you see this 1-2 punch again, often enough, and it's I can tell you a number of those religious leaders. I happen to serve as a trustee on the Parliament of the World's Religions. We work with the UN Multi-Faith Advisory Council. We also have local leaders that we work with out here across the religious spectrum, from Zoroastrian to Buddhist, Muslim, Christian, et cetera. And I think there's a shared recognition that any time a political leader makes a move like this and suggests a massive disapproval, in this case on the Vicar of Christ, right, and the Bishop of Rome, like this isn't just critiquing the pastor down the street.
Right.
It causes a bit of pause in terms of what's the justification, rationale, or capacity. Where is this person operating in terms of their kind of theater of sovereignty, self-sovereignty? What do they think in terms of how they're speaking? And we're going to see more of this, not less. And not just from Donald Trump, because we see that he is often a guide for other autocrats or authoritarian figures around the world. That critique, not just of religious leadership, but of any power sources that are providing authority in people's lives in one form or another. If they disagree with an authoritarian regime, they will be critiqued. But the great brazen thing he does is to suggest that he is the author of this person's own leadership. I don't know what to do with that.
You wonder what the Cardinals thought when they heard that.
Well, I mean, you know, it's very interesting to see what he's done is he's mobilized a religious response. So you saw sub-cardinals who were interviewed recently talking about just war.
60 Minutes.
It was 60 Minutes, that's right. And I forget which cardinal who mentioned, you know, it was a discussion on just war. So he provides, this president provides the context by which there's a conversation. And these cardinals who don't typically get airtime are invited 60 Minutes, and they do. And their response is, you know, they're clarifying, again, really in line with what, in this case, Pope Leo said. And we're going to see more of that, and it'll be important for religious leadership, not just individually, but I'm seeing it also up and down the West Coast. We have leaders from LA to Seattle who are asking themselves, how do we, in light of those kinds of statements, ensure that we are guiding communities that are moving towards more safety and more thriving in our own municipalities and region. So he's providing a conversation he'd rather not have take place, which is not to accept this kind of authoritative landscape. authoritarian landscape, but instead to ask ourselves, what's our next best action against someone who would say that you're here because I put you here?
Yeah, it's as if he's the source of all that is. And we have, Augustus Caesar, famously. There was a growing religion around Augustus Caesar at the time of Jesus, claiming that he was the son of the god Apollo. On the coin, the Roman coin, it was Tiberius, son of the divine Augustus. Certainly, we go back further in Middle Eastern history. We see Pharaoh claiming to be the son of the god, right? The sun god, right? And that's a way to say that there's a pyramidal structure to society that the gods have put in place, and that the Pharaoh sitting on top of the pyramid has been put there by the divine, that the structure and order is divine, and your place in the pyramid, whether that's in the royal family or whether that's a slave, is also divine, and that society should be basically creating wealth for the very top upper folk, and the rest of the society has to obey. And I believe that Trump is trying to activate that same kind of logic again, which we have seen strands of within Christianity. But I don't believe that is faithful to Jesus' approach to leadership and to how we treat one another and how we form a society.
It wasn't long after President Trump made his assertion in terms of being responsible for Leo's election as Pope, that Vice President J.D. Vance began to weigh in on this whole issue. And he said, I think one of the issues here is if you're going to opine on matters of theology, you've got to be careful. Probably not a bad statement in itself. But you've got to make sure it's anchored in truth, and that's one of the things I try to do, and certainly something I would expect from the clergy, whether they're Catholic or Protestant. And it was interesting, I read an op-ed piece by an Atlantic magazine writer and a former instructor for the Naval War College who said, Vance is not merely arguing with the Pope, he's putting himself in a position of instructing the Pope. Would you agree with that? And what's your take on that exchange?
Well, the word opine is a very interesting word, as if Pope Leo is not faithfully expressing the core of Western Christianity and the core of Roman Catholic theology. And so he's trying to say that the Pope is just another opinion maker. He's opining out there. He's someone else writing into a newspaper, or kind of rando person writing into the Seattle Times about what morality is. And so again, there's this kind of idea that the Trump administration is the source of truth. They define what truth is. They define what power is. It's all about them. It's all in reference to them, instead of in reference to a higher ideal, instead of in reference to the creator of all people. And our founding document, said that all human beings are created equal. And so there is a reference to the source of all of life, however one would define that, and that our deepest allegiance, to that source of all life is to be respectful of the other people around us. And so we're always questioning our behavior in reference to the Creator. Donald Trump famously said that he's never felt the need to confess anything. And that's because he doesn't see himself accountable to the Creator, I think, in a way. And I think that's very dangerous for a leader. And I think it is part of the source of some of that authoritarianism that we're talking about.
It's interesting. I mean, there's two things happening in my sense of this. The first is that our relationship to authority, how we understand those who are authoritative, voices, moral voices, provide leadership for our communities has diminished greatly. There's this book, Bowling Alone, you may recall, it came out a couple decades ago now. And the whole premise is that we're in a place where we become more fragmented from one another, really isolated in terms of how we understand the moral voice. So everyone has an opinion. And opinions are good things. We want to have representation, but there's no hierarchy of opinions. So it's okay for me to say, you should watch how you're thinking theologically to the Vicar of Christ, because I've somehow imbued myself with enough of authoritative capacity to say that very thing. Okay. I mean, we can say that's comical and he's way off base and we don't agree with it, but it's a part of a larger kind of disintegration I think we have to be attentive to, about how we think of who has the right to speak on behalf of a deeper human consensus that isn't going to be guided by an authoritarian impulse in one direction or another. Pope Leo, these cardinals, archbishops, other Christian leaders are really referring to the root stock of Christian identity, theological discourse that comes out of the first 4 centuries of their experience in and around the Roman Empire, where they're facing massive repression. And the part of the issue is to ensure that you have theological discourse that's aware of 2 things. We are a community in the particular, and that's a faith community in particular, but we're also a community in the universal sense of responding to the needs of the world. So when someone who is a participant in an America First platform that thinks only in the particular is confronting a major global religious leader who's thinking in both the particular but fundamentally in the universal, what's good for our humanity. Pope Leo, he's seeing peace and love of neighbor as a fundamental precondition for living well in the world. He wants that. And he's not going to be lectured by any kind of authoritarian platform that would put the neighbor and an attempt toward, in this case, kind of diplomatic peace when we think of Iran as secondary or tertiary. It's just not going to be, it's not going to pay the rent.
So, yeah, just a couple things. I think, Michael mentioned a few minutes ago that there's this, loss of trust in authority and trust in in traditions around this and around how we treat each other in the world. And as I've been out and about, doing work in the world, trying to bring communities together, in the ground in neighborhoods, and listening to so many different people from across the spectrum, so many people feel a sense of what sociologists call affective polarization. They feel that their group is striving to be moral, but that other groups aren't. They're getting that data, of course, primarily through social media and from public leaders. But there's this, it's not just that we've lost a sense of morality, it's that we've lost trust that our neighbors are moral. But then what happens invariably when we get people together is they realize, oh, wait, these other communities, they care about our community. They're willing to spend their time doing a service project. They have very deep thoughts about how we treat each other as people. And what people realize is that everybody else hasn't given up on the fundamental social contract of love of the particular and the universal, of love of self and neighbor. It's just that we don't know each other well enough to know it. And that in fact, I think in a lot of ways, the authoritarian movements in this country and across the world are taking advantage of the fact, as Robert Putnam said in Bowling Alone, is that we are not only lonely as individuals, we are separated from each other as groups. We are isolated from each other. And so that's why the work of the center is so important. That's why we're doing the work we're doing to try to help bring people together across tables. Because I don't believe, as important as a TV show is, right, that this is the place where we can create trust.
Right.
Trust, these people have to experience the moral framework that someone else is bringing to what it means to be a human being in this moment. And I believe that our trust in authority is not just intellectual or is not just about a moral code, it's relational. And as we come together, we start to see, hey, wait a minute, we may have real differences. We may need to fight about those and discuss those energetically. But the fact is that we share a lot of this moral framework and a lot of commitment to community that we are just not seeing because we're seeing each other through social media instead of face-to-face.
We're looking at a interesting convergence between this whole issue of the interrelationship between religion and public life, politics, and international relations as we enter the 250th anniversary of this country, and we hear a lot of words on patriot, freedom, and liberty. Those seem to take on one meaning as we're hearing them expressed a lot on media nowadays. But How do those compare to what the Founding Fathers had very definite ideas between the relationship of church and state? How would you suggest we re-educate ourselves in terms of what those should mean or how we should apply those?
I think that's an essential question, especially as we're looking at the 250th, because we're going to see a kind of triumphalist parade that will be a mockery, I think, of the patriotism that those founding fathers and mothers were thinking about in terms of the kind of build-up to the Declaration of Independence and eventually the Constitution. These folks were, by and large, no matter how we recast it, they were deists or Congregationalists, which means they were Unitarian Universalist, or what is today we might call Disciples of Christ, or Episcopalian. This is before you had German Lutherans here, before you had many Catholics here, and their thinking about their coming out of experience has been wholly repressive. That's identified in the Declaration of Independence when they mention the perfidy and cruelty of George III. There's a reason why they're naming it that. Most of the Declaration takes up that. When you get to the Constitution, in terms of the role of religion, and a lot of these men, I should say, were decorated. The local Episcopal churches would give awards. One of my grandfathers signed the Declaration of Independence, just as a side, and there's a bit of the lore of that. Like there were a lot of kind of notices and of appreciation. So they weren't contrary to religion. However, there's a reason why we have the Bill of Rights, because a number of those well-intended forefathers were also very suspicious about the role of power unharnessed. And so you have the Constitution, but those who are anti-federalists said, I don't know if I trust the power of a centralized government in this way. So there's certain things we have to put in place, including the Bill of Rights. And that first article on the Establishment Clause is, which is a part of the Bill of Rights, the first article, is important to recognize here. There is no official status of a religion that is state-sponsored in the U.S. government. That's enshrined in the Constitution. And there can be relationships for direct service, and we saw that grow in the 19th century in particular. So a lot of those agencies were helping immigrants and other communities that were unhoused, those who had food insecurity at the time. Like those direct service operations were leveraged out to many of those Christian organizations at the time, not entirely Christian, but that's a way in which state and church, as we often refer in the shorthand, work together. But the role of religion, which I think is essential to your question, because what we're seeing with the rise of religious nationalism in this country, Christian nationalism, was never meant to be kind of sinewed into what we often refer to now as a theocratic state. That's not our legacy. It's not our heritage. It's not what those forefathers had in mind, and it's not what they thought about in terms of the kind of the patriotic spirit. And in fact, when you look at the letters between Jefferson and Adams, there's reference to a growing concern of an evangelical impulse. Not that evangelical is wholly bad, but in terms of how they meant it, a kind of a fervor around the too close connection between the state as an implement of divine will and my faith that makes it so it can do whatever I want it to. We haven't seen this close of a kind of reconfiguration, I would say. I mean, people may argue with this until most recently, where you have someone like the sitting president of the United States referred to in messianic terms. That's new. Yeah. That's relatively new for us in a modern time. So we're going to have to contend with that at the 250th, which I think is unfortunate because it's actually quite a time to remember our unity and diversity. It's quite a time to remember the importance of our citizenry and the immigrants that come from all over the world and benefit directly the work and the evolution of the identity of this country. That doesn't happen when you're looking at a kind of truncated America First ideology that wants to celebrate something because it sees the United States as a passive thing rather than a dynamic kind of evolutionary process of self-becoming, which is very much what the Founding Fathers thought.
Yeah, so we the people, right? So we the people, and the Bill of Rights try to discern, try to help us maintain the rights of the individual and the rights of the state and our responsibilities to each other. The word freedom doesn't simply mean freedom from. The word freedom means that together we seek the general welfare so that individuals and groups of people have freedom to be educated, to receive, to have a job, to have medical care, to have places to go play and have fun, to be able to be the best human being that they can possibly be, in order to have the freedom and responsibility to contribute to the broader community. Patriotism. I consider myself a patriotic individual. I love my country. I love my country within the framework of the entire world and within the framework of the whole created order. So yes, I love my country, but it's not about us versus them. It's about a particular us among a bunch of other particular groups of people. And then the question is, under the framework, so the Declaration of Independence, starts off with that all humans are created equal. But then it uses that as a kind of a reference point to a whole stream, not only Christian stream, of recognition that everyone is human. And that what it means to be human is partly to recognize the humanity of other people, but also the humanity of people of other cultures and traditions. And our country is trying to honor that e pluribus unum, out of many one. Right. And what I fear is happening right now is an attempt to, out of many, force everyone to be the same. And that is not fundamentally the vision of this country. It is not fundamentally the vision of the Abrahamic tradition, which says in Genesis 12 that the role of one particular tribe and culture is in part to recognize that it's to be a blessing to other tribes and cultures.
If you think of the perfidy and cruelty that's named to the Declaration of Independence, cruelty itself, and ask yourself what they had in mind, it's the overreach of any form of governing force that not only imposes itself on your daily activities, taxes you, takes away your property, impugns you, can put you in jail, but it's also a force that can rename how you actually see the world. It can suggest to you that what you're experiencing is other than how you're seeing it, that this is fake news, for instance, that this is not what's actually taking place, and that you're the culprit. You're the one who's in the wrong. That form of insidious kind of infusion of power that disassembles the assembly of the voting public, of the citizenry, is a huge existential threat. They're facing that down. And I think it's important for us, the 250th, to remember that sense of perfidy and cruelty that they had in mind, that wants to rename the character of your daily life, is with us today. And we have to be mindful of that and discerning about where the truth actually is.
As we look very consciously at these risks, at the challenges we're facing, does this perhaps pose, as we conclude this conversation, some opportunities that we might not have had otherwise? Terry, do you want to tackle that first?
Yeah, I do. So Paths to Understanding is like part of a broad network, and just like Michael's organization at the center is part of a broad network of civic renewal organizations. There's about 12,000 of them in the country. And what we're really seeing in this moment is an opportunity. Because many Americans feel that something's off. We know that not all of us are thriving. We know that not all of us feel like we belong. And what these organizations are saying is we want to build a society where everyone belongs and everyone can thrive, and that the next 250 years of our democracy may look really different than the last 250. Because right now the Constitution's kind of been hacked, more than just a little bit. And there is a deep and broad effort to renew democracy from neighborhood up, from city up, from towns, and counties, people coming together and beginning to say, hey, what can we do to help each other thrive and belong in this place? And I believe actually, even though it's underreported, or maybe not reported at all, that there is a broad movement of people in this country coming together as citizens to decide how they're going to move forward in cooperation with elected leaders. And we're seeing that happen across Washington State. And I can point to example after example of communities saying, hey, wait a minute, we don't have to live like this. And I believe that we, the people, are gathering together again. And we may not be able to see it yet, but in community and neighborhood and town after another, it is happening.
Michael, what's your sense with especially your institute?
Well, I think very much I agree with the work that's being done, and it has been elevated in the last couple of years, particularly since January 25. I see kind of collaborative efforts taking place in ways that have become sharper and more attuned to public needs. So there's work going on at the UN now with the Multi-Faith Advisory Council I mentioned. There's work going on in this region. We could talk a lot about that. But I think we need to ensure, wherever the work is that the elevation is low to where people are actually living in their lives. We need to ensure that those, I think of a single mom in Pittsburgh with 3 kids who's connected to one of these more kind of Christian nationalist organizations. It gives her a tremendous amount of hope. It allows her to face the next day. She's connected to her community. And she has 2 guys over here in Seattle saying, that's actually contrary to the Christian worldview. That's a bitter pill. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that we need to do is ensure that this is a long project we're talking about getting attuned and aligned to where people are living their lives, mm-hmm. and re-infusing those moments with the very thing that this administration has said we don't care about anymore, and that's empathy. We've got to get closer to people's stories. And those religious and wisdom traditions have every capacity to be able to do that. They need to do that effectively, and they need to ensure that they're telling their politicians to do the same thing.
I thank you both for the wonderful points and wisdom that you shared with us, and would like to invite you both back, because I suspect we're going to be dealing with some of these same issues down the road. So thank you both so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeff.
And thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Challenge 2.0. We hope you'll join us again next week.